216 Teachings of Hūṃchenkāra. Teachings of Hūṃchenkāra.
C.
The instructions on not allowing the uniform pervasiveness of a quality to be defiled by the faults of conceptual elaboration. On yet another occasion, when I met the great Vidyadhara Hūṃchenkāra, I asked him, "What is this array of appearances like?" He replied, "O great being, the 5 kinds of sensory consciousness are like space, in which anything may emerge. Discursive thoughts are like substances and mantras used by an illusionist, such that illusion-like arrays of appearances arise due to the simultaneous conjunction. Consciousness that closely attends to them is like a spectator. Thus, all substances that are offered and donated are like illusory substances. The approach of the illusion-like yoga is to dissolve them into emptiness with purifying mantras, and then use enriching mantras to immeasurably increase the appearances of these offerings to the 6 senses of the objects of worship, so that they are well pleased. Further, by means of the illusion-like yoga, you generate appearances like a city of Gandharvas to emanation like sentient beings, and by transforming these dream-like appearances, you liberate and guide them and so forth. And by so doing you gain mastery over the great yoga of illusion. No matter how many planets and stars are reflected in a lake, the reflections are encompassed within the water itself. No matter how many physical worlds and the sentient inhabitants there are, they are encompassed within a single space. And no matter how vast and numerous are the appearances of samsara and nirvana, they are encompassed within the single ultimate nature of mind. Observe how this is so. On yet another occasion, when I met the great Vidyadhara Hūṃchenkāra, I asked him, "What is this array of appearances like?" He replied, "O great being, the 5 kinds of sensory consciousness are like space, in which anything may emerge. Discursive thoughts are like substances and mantras used by an illusionist. Due to the simultaneous conjunction of the 5 kinds of sensory consciousness and discursive thoughts, all the arrays of appearances of the outer physical world, its inner, animate sentient inhabitants, and the 5 types of sensory stimuli are like the apparitions of an illusionist. The mental consciousness that closely identifies with them is like a spectator. You must correctly understand the nature. A yogin who realizes this uses purifying mantras to dissolve all offerings and gifts, which are like illusory substances, into emptiness. He then uses enriching mantras to immeasurably increase their appearances to the 6 senses of the beings to whom he makes offerings and gifts, and imagines that they are well pleased by these offerings. This is the sublime avenue of illusion-like yoga for implicitly perfecting the 2 accumulations, of merit and of knowledge, on the path of yoga. As it is said, as a samaya for the Ratna family, one constantly makes gifts of 4 kinds. Once you have taken the samayas of the preliminary phase of an empowerment, it is important that you apply yourself to them constantly. Therefore, in the manner of a smoke offering, as if you were an illusionist, first clearly visualize yourself in the form of any personal deity. With a purifying mantra, purify in emptiness the smoke offerings together with a ritual stove, as if they were the substances and mantras of an illusionist. With an enriching mantra, imagine the ground, intervening space, and sky filled with every single object of form, sound, smell, taste, and tactile sensation, transforming them all into space treasuries, as if they were apparitions. Imagine the revered 3 jewels, who are like spectators, as guests filling the sky like shining constellations of stars, noble protector guests filling the intervening space like billowing clouds, and guests who deliver karmic retribution to obstructive beings, slightly elevated above the ground and filling the sky like dust particles. On the ground, imagine the 6 types of beings, who are guests worthy of compassion, gathered like an assembly of gods and men. Then emanate and present the smoke offerings in the forms of all kinds of enjoyments to the 6 senses of these guests, imagining the guests to be like water vessels. Imagine that these enjoyments arise to the 6 faculties like planets and stars until they fade into space, and that the nature is inexhaustible. Imagine that all the guests are delighted and thoroughly pleased, and that your habitual propensities are purified, that dullness is dispelled, that you obey all commands, and that you have favorable friends and circumstances. Finally, as if the illusionist's apparitions are dissolving into space, you as the one who makes the offerings, the offering substances, and the guests to whom offerings are made all disappear, and you conclude with prayers of dedication. In the morning, water offerings are to be made as follows. Once again visualize yourself, as if you were an illusionist, in the form of your personal deity, either as Sakyamuni or the Great Compassionate One, Avalokitesvara, white in color, complete with all the correct hand implements and ornaments. Likewise, with a purifying mantra, purify in emptiness the water and its containers, and from emptiness visualize a vast, jeweled container arising from the syllable tram, in which that substance is generated. Above it visualize a white red R, and blue hum, one stacked upon another. Increase them with an enriching mantra, and then simultaneously imagine a rain of white ohms, red Rs, and blue hums descending, and visualize from the palms of yourself as your personal deity a stream of ambrosia flowing out and dissolving into the seed syllables inside the container. As a consequence of this, visualize the ambrosia of the taintless primordial consciousness of bliss and emptiness, white and red with a tint of blue, as all kinds of offering substances of form, sound, smell, taste, and tactile sensation arising as objects to the six senses. As you offer them to the revered three jewels, the noble protectors, malevolent beings who are karmic creditors, and the six kinds of sentient beings deserving of compassion, imagine that they partake of these equally distributed offerings with the tongues in the forms of vajras and hollow rays of light, and that they achieve a state free of strife and conflict, filled with joy and delight. Visualize the remaining offerings as flames presented to the mouth of the King of Pretas, and by dedicating the merits, imagine that the beings to whom you have made these offerings are all satisfied, that all the delusive appearances and habitual propensities cease, and that they achieve enlightenment. At the conclusion, dissolve everything into space and offer prayers of dedication. At night, burnt offerings are to be made as follows. Visualize yourself as your personal deity in the illusory rainbow body form of Arya Avalokitesvara, white in color and bearing the ornaments of a Sambhogakaya. Purify in emptiness the burnt offerings and ritual stove in front of you. From emptiness, emanate from the syllable Ram a vast stove, inside of which the burnt offerings appear as an inexhaustible space treasury of forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations in the space of the six senses of all the kinds of guests. Invite the four classes of guests, who are like spectators effortlessly receiving whatever kinds of enjoyments they desire, and imagine that the two higher types of guests experience the supreme satisfaction of the taste of bliss and emptiness and achieve the supreme and common siddhis. Imagine that the two lower types of guests achieve liberation. At the conclusion, seal the offering by imagining that the three aspects disappear, and then dedicate the merit. At dusk, the offering of your body is to be made as follows. This offering of your body is the foremost of all gifts. In the past, the king known by the name Great Courage gave his body to a tigress. The king known as Power of Love sacrificed his body to the 5 Yaksa brothers. Princess Madhebhadra gave her body to a tigress, and Drime Kundan gave away his son and wife. Those were all blessed deeds of bodhisattvas, and such actual conduct is rare. Makik Lapran writes in this regard. If gifts of horses and cattle merit 100, gifts of your children and wife merit 1,000, and the gift of your body merits 100,000. In this world, this body is cherished above all things, so if it is given away, due to that accumulation of merit with this as an object, the accumulation of knowledge without an object is perfected. Therefore, first of all visualize this big, plump, sleek, glistening body as being as vast as a galaxy. In its center, visualize the central channel like an erect pillar in an empty building, with its upper end at the crown of your head like an opening at the top of a cave, and its lower end beneath your navel like a blocked bamboo joint. Inside this channel, imbued with four qualities, at the level of your heart, imagine the essential nature of your energy, mind and consciousness as a white bindu, like the egg of a massa bird, luminous, shining, sleek, twirling, and about to shoot upward like a meteor. Then, as you utter fat the first time, it merges with space, the second time it emerges from space, and the third time you instantly transform into black macictroma, your body indigo in color, with one head and two hands. Your right hand brandishes a curved flaying knife in the sky, symbolizing your mastery of appearances, and your left hand holds at your heart a blood-filled skull cup, symbolizing your enjoyment of the three realms as blood. Your right leg is bent with your heel pointing to your bhaga, and your left leg is extended, trampling a corpse upon a lotus and sun disk. Your mouth is open, with your tongue coiled and your sharp, white fangs bared. Vajra fire blazes from your facial hair and eyebrows, your three eyes move fiercely, and you scowl like a tidal wave. In the midst of your orange hair, at the apex of conditioned existence, there is the black head of a pig whose squeal rouses all sentient beings from the slumber of delusion. A three-pointed katvanga, of the nature of your consort, Heruka, rests on your left shoulder, and you bear the 8 garments of a charnel ground and are adorned with the 6 types of bone ornaments. Imagine yourself as an illusory kaya of the primordial consciousness of appearances and emptiness, in the midst of a blazing fire of primordial consciousness. Simply brandishing a curved flaying knife in your right hand, you flay the skin off a corpse lying on the ground and spread it over the whole earth. Upon it is a threefold hearth of dry, moist, and old self-appearing skulls, symbolizing the 3 kayas, as large as Mount Meru. The aggregate of form is cast from above into the hearth of skulls, where it disintegrates into many pieces. Beneath the hearth of skulls, the air element emerges from the syllable yam and the fire element arises from the syllable ram, causing the air element to move. With the blazing of the fire, the skulls heat up, melting and boiling the contents, such that the bubbles spill over and fall on the skin-covered ground. The whole earth and intervening space are filled with a mountain of flesh to feed upon, an ocean of blood to drink, a river bank of bones to chew, a soup of grease and fat, and bones and marrow to suck. Having expanded these inexhaustible ornamental wheels of sensual pleasures into a space treasury, a rain of white ohms, red Rs, and blue hums blessed by the body, speech, and mind of all the Tathagatas falls from space, dissolving into the ambrosia, which takes on a sheen of white and red with a tint of blue. Just by experiencing the rain touching your mouth, you are liberated in the blessing of this great ambrosia of primordial consciousness. From the vapor of the bubbles are emanated incredible arrays of outer, inner, and secret offerings. Imagine that with the first utterance of fat the sounding of thigh-bone trumpets catches the attention of the guests, with the second they set out from their abodes, and with the third they all converge. In the sky are the revered guests of the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the Gurus, personal deities, and Dakhinas, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, and all the sublime Gurus endowed with the 3 lineages, clustered together like a shimmering constellation. In the intervening space are the noble protector guests, including the 8 devas, 8 nagas, 8 planets, 9 terrifying ones, 10 guardians of the directions, 28 constellations, 4 classes of great kings, and so on, gathered like billowing clouds. Elevated slightly above the ground are the guests who deliver karmic retribution to malevolent beings. They include assemblies of Parthivas who are male spirits, demonesses who are female spirits, assemblies of Nagas, Greyas, and Kesamapatis, the 18 Phungsidra demons, 15 childish great demons, the mother Harini 69 and her 500 sons, 9 demons of attachment to mundane existence, 10 temple demons, minor demons of sudden winds, and so on, all gathered in the sky like a host of dust particles. On the ground are the 6 kinds of sentient beings deserving of compassion, including hell beings, pretas, animals, asuras, humans, gods, and so on, appearing like an assembly of gods and men. from your heart, as the goddess, are emanated countless activity dakinas, who make offerings by scooping with jeweled ladles with their right hands and pouring into skull cups in their left hands. The revered guests, the three jewels, partake of the vital essence of the ambrosia through the tongues, which take on forms of tubular gems, vajras, lotuses, and rays of light, and their minds are satisfied by the taste of bliss and emptiness. Imagine that your two accumulations, of merit and knowledge, are perfected, that the two types of afflictive and cognitive obscurations are purified, and that you achieve the supreme and common siddhis. Imagine that the noble protector guests enjoy the vital essence of the ambrosia by way of the tongues in the form of hollow swords, and that they are satisfied by the taste of bliss and emptiness. Imagine that this atones for your transgressions, that you realize limitless, bountiful enlightened activities, and that your outer, inner, and secret obstacles are dispelled. By equally dedicating the flesh and blood, white and sweet substances, and ambrosia to the guests who deliver karmic retribution to malevolent beings, imagine that they achieve freedom from strife and conflict, their debts of karmic retribution and killing are paid, all harmful behaviors of viciousness, hostility, and disturbance are pacified, and precious bodhisattva arises in their midstreams. Imagine that the negative karma, the causes and conditions for delusion, and their habitual propensities are exhausted, and that they achieve enlightenment. For the 6 types of guests who are deserving of compassion, imagine that the offerings transform into dharma and medicine to dispel their individual kinds of suffering, into streams of water to purify the negative karma, and into whatever kinds of sensual enjoyments they desire. By dedicating offerings to them in this way, imagine that they are contented and satisfied, and that the 6 kinds of beings are freed from their individual kinds of suffering. All their vices, obscurations, and habitual propensities are purified, and they experience visions of enlightened teachers and their retinues in the pure realms of the 5 Buddha families, including Irati and so on, so that they dredge the depths of samsara. Then, gathering all the scattered remains inside the skull cups, bless them in the ambrosia of primordial consciousness, and give them to the remaining humble guests who are feeble, sluggish, crippled, deaf, blind, or mute. When you do so, they are satisfied with enjoyments in accordance with their individual desires, and they are each freed of the sufferings. The humble ones become endowed with the power of nobility, those who are weak, with the power of abundant self-mastery, the sluggish, with swift, wrathful power, the crippled, with miraculous legs, the blind, with eyes of primordial consciousness, the deaf, with all hearing auditory faculties, and the mute, with eloquent tongues. Imagine that they are utterly delighted and smiling, and that the supreme, taintless primordial consciousness of bliss and emptiness arises in all their midstreams. In addition, imagine guests who did not have time to come, yakshas who dwell on the seashore at the foot of Mount Meru, those who dwell on the 2nd terrace of Mount Meru, those who dwell on its summit, old female pretas, and female terma protectors. Imagine guests who did not heed the invitation to attend, male maras holding skulls, female maras who send illnesses, big-bellied grayers with boils, and so on, all these beings experiencing only the miseries of their own karmic appearances. Imagine sending forth ambrosia to their abodes, such that they are all contented and satisfied, all the fears of the delusive appearances and miseries vanish into space as if they were awakened from sleep, and they achieve enlightenment. At the end, you as the dedicator, the 4 kinds of guests as the objects of dedication, and all the dedicated substances, together with the illusion-like apparitional appearances, merge into the space of the Nirmanakaya with the first recitation of Fat. With the 2nd recitation you merge into the space of the Sambhogakaya, and with the 3rd recitation you merge into the space of the Dharmakaya. Then rest for a little while in meditative equipoise in the bare nature of objectless uniform pervasiveness. Then, like a bubble emerging from water, imagine all gods and demons of the world of appearances in front of you, as you instantaneously visualize yourself in the form of the Great Compassionate One. Imagine teaching them the Dharma, and due to white rays of light emanating from your body, all the male beings achieve the state of Avalokitesvara and all the female beings achieve the state of the Venerable Tara. Their hands are all pressed together in mudras and their legs are moving about. Imagine that they depart for Sukhavati with a whooshing sound, like a flock of vultures lofting into the sky. Place your awareness in a state devoid of an object and dedicate the virtue to perfect enlightenment. When you make supplications and offerings to the guardians of the teachings without mental emanations like illusory apparitions, the gods are not pleased, so they provide no benefit, only harm. First visualize yourself as any of the personal deities, and from your heart, imagine black light thoroughly pervading the world, completely assembling all injurious beings, enemies, and malevolent beings, who merge indivisibly with the Torma offering. By gathering them together, imagine that the enemies and malevolent beings of the 10 fields are completely assembled, so that none are left elsewhere. Finally, imagine creative expressions of primordial consciousness from space descending as a rain of various weapons, creating a mountain of flesh and an ocean of blood as vast as space that liberates them from their infractions. Then, with a purifying mantra, purify all the contaminations of the offering substances in emptiness. From the nature of emptiness a syllable R emerges from your heart, giving rise to a vast skull cup, white on the outside, red on the inside, and as enormous as a galaxy. Inside it, from gathering together the quintessence and vital essence of the 5 elements and the Torma substances, there emerges a mountain of flesh, an ocean of blood, river banks of bones, mountains of the 3 white substances and 3 sweet substances, an ocean of milk and yogurt, various kinds of fruits, various sorts of offering substances and ritual instruments, various kinds of forest creatures, domestic animals, water-dwelling birds and predators, powerful armor, sharp weapons, and various beautiful silken garments. Soft to the touch. In addition, imagine an inconceivable, inexhaustible array of offerings, including ritual offerings, sensory enjoyments, medicine, tormas, blood, and the 7 royal possessions, all having a nature such that they satisfy the desires of each of the beings to whom they are offered. Bless them with the 6 mantras and 6 mudras. Imagine the bountiful array of offerings in front of you as a natural display of primordial consciousness, and in the midst of fire, rainbow light, and clouds of smoke, visualize the male lineage of the protectors of the teachings, the female lineage of goddesses, and the 8 classes of matters, each with his or her own bodily color, hand implements, and clothing, as described in the classic treatises. Imagine them mounted upon swift steeds, wearing mighty armor, brandishing sharp weapons, and imbued with wrathful and wondrous splendor. In the meantime, from the domains of the 5 elements invite countless protectors of the teachings bearing similar forms, and repeatedly visualize them merging with the deities you have generated. Do not interrupt this with human words, do not let your bodily warmth dissipate from your meditation cushion, and without forgetfulness, distinctly call out the names. If you actualize them, they will be established as existent from the space of non-existence. As an analogy, they will be directly established as if you had constructed a building by compounding earth, stone, and wood. Even those matters who present themselves as autonomously existent do not exist as something else, for all the appearances of the creative power of pristine awareness are merely designated as protectors of the teachings of the secret mantrayana by the skillful means and compassion of the jinnas. They have no other existence apart from those designations. As a result of making supplications and offerings to them, while recognizing them as being like conjury and illusory apparitions, imagine that they partake of the offerings by taking in the vital essence of the tormas through hollow tubes of light from the weapons of the tongues. With their minds satisfied by the taste of bliss and emptiness, imagine that they blaze with magnificent power and that they limitlessly realize the 4 kinds of enlightened activity of practicing yogins. Moreover, when making offerings of grain and so forth, imagine immeasurable clouds of offerings being emanated from your heart as your personal deity, and offer them to the Dharmapalas, who are pleased by this. At the end, you enjoin them to perform any tasks that you desire, and without the departing or assembling, imagine that all detrimental obstacles to reaching the grounds and paths on the way to enlightenment are dispelled and that they assist you in increasing all favorable circumstances. They then remain in your life principle stone and in the space of your life force chakra. When you actualize the Dharmapalas, you must visualize them as being permanent, firm, and enduring. When you finally die, if you think of yourself as disintegrating into space, as if you were an illusory apparition, there is no need to visualize them dissolving or ask them to leave. Such is the unsurpassable yogic experience of realizing samsara and nirvana as illusory. You yogins who realize all phenomena as being like illusions, shift the appearances of sentient beings to self-appearances that are not other than yourselves. Then, skillfully take care of all the karmic deeds that sentient beings have experienced and will experience and that have been accumulated since beginningless time, as follows. 1. Imagine ferocious, pernicious beings as if they were appearances of a city of Gandharvas, and engage in the wrathful enlightened activity of annihilating those beings. 2. To mercifully and compassionately care for those who are filled with passionate desires, visualize pacifying enlightened activity. 3. Transforming many eons into a single instant, imagine annihilating pernicious beings with the thought of drawing in their life forces, purifying their vices, and sending them to a pure land. 4. Take care of those with passionate desires by bringing them to a higher state, like waking them from a dream. You are able to forcefully unite them with the realm of original purity in which delusion is impossible. Thus, the ability to master the great, illusory yoga arises from the essential point of realizing all phenomena as illusions. 1. First, as for the activity of liberating ferocious, pernicious beings through destruction, the triad of the fortress of the view, the highway of meditation, and the life force of visualization is very important. Regarding the fortress of the view, the knowledge that samsara and nirvana are not other than your own appearances is the fortress of the view. The highway of meditation is not mistaking pristine awareness for the mind by never being separated from the samadhi of your personal deity. The life force of visualization requires the vitality transmission and the purification transmission. In this regard there are 3 visualizations, in the upper portion of your body, instantly visualized in the form of your personal deity. Imagine the gurus of the lineage of teachings. In the middle area at the hips, visualize the assemblies of personal deities, and in the lower portion of your body, imagine all the dakanas and dharmapalas, like planets and stars brilliantly reflected in the ocean. After transforming the nature of all the sentient beings who inhabit the world into that of your personal deity, the visualization of them engaging in the activity of killing and liberating enemies and malevolent beings is the vital point of the not turning back against you. The Supreme Sun Kila is the youthful Vajra, with his upper body visualized as a wrathful king having 3 faces and 6 arms. His lower body is visualized as a 3-sided kila made of meteorite metal, as if it were created in a blacksmith's charcoal hearth, and as a mass of snakes vomited from the mouth of a sea monster. On the upper globe above the handle of the kila, visualize the palace of the 5 peaceful Buddhas. On the bulbous handle of the kila, visualize the palace of the 9 blood-drinking deities, and on the lower globe of the kila, visualize the palace of the glorious kila protectors. Imagine rays of light being emitted from the 3 syllables at his 3 places, drawing in all the empowerments, blessings, and siddhis of the jinnas and dissolving them into the kila, such that simply due to the mightiness of the bodies, the sounding of their voices, and the movements of their minds the kila receives the empowerment to simultaneously liberate the 3 realms. This is the vital point of unconquerableness. For the direct visualization of enemies and malevolent beings as your meditative objects, imagine a dark blue syllable A being emitted from your heart as your personal deity, from which emerges the kaya of the 5 poisons as a black slaughterhouse of karma yama. Its interior is cloaked in the darkness of delusion, an ocean of the blood of attachment boils beneath it, its center is racked by the dark wind of envy, its corners crumble with landslides from the cliffs of pride, and its exterior blazes with the flames of hatred. Its three corners symbolize the spontaneous actualization of the three kayas, and its three levels symbolize the release of the three poisons into space. It is unassailable by the forces of maras and yamas. On the exterior fortifications are sharp, pointed spears aligned in a row. Inside it, rays of light emanate from the syllables and re to the enemies and tree to the malevolent beings, instantly drawing in and dissolving the life principle, vitality, and life force of enemies and malevolent beings throughout all the realms of galaxies. As a result of this transformation, the enemies and malevolent beings weep with their mouths, show distress with their eyes as if someone had died, and wring their hands in misery. With their feet and hands bound by chains, they involuntarily lose their white and red bodhisattva, and as if they had been cast naked into a barren wasteland, they have no protector or refuge. Imagine these pathetic, breathless beings trembling and shaking with fear. Moreover, wherever the nature of the life principle, vitality, and life force of enemies descends in these external worlds, imagine that there is nothing that can prevent the death of the enemies. This is the sublime, vital point of them, the enemies, not spreading elsewhere. Among the three restorations, the first is the restoration of yourself. Imagine immeasurable syllables of hum being emanated from your heart as your personal deity, completely filling all dimensions of samsara and nirvana. Like salt dissolving into water, visualize all the Buddhas, Buddha fields, and physical worlds with the sentient inhabitants of the three realms dissolving into the hums. Imagine them all being drawn inward and dissolving into yourself, resulting in your transforming into the universal splendor of all of samsara and nirvana. As for the restoration of the Kila, directly visualize the Supreme Sun Kila, the youthful Vajra. Sparks from the Kila are emitted like sparks from a fire, completely filling all the worlds of appearances of samsara and nirvana. As before, imagine all the phenomena included in both samsara and nirvana merging into the Kila, like salt dissolving into water. Imagine all the power, might, and strength of all of samsara and nirvana being drawn in and perfected. As for the restoration of enemies and obstructive beings, directly visualize enemies and obstructive beings as an effigy from which black light is emitted, retracting and dissolving into the effigy the life principle, vitality, and life force, as well as the merit and enjoyments, of all enemies, obstructive beings, and malevolent beings, like drops of water that completely disperse into a pool of water. Thus, all malevolent beings are retracted and perfected. To use the messengers to make a summons, imagine yourself as the deity, emanating from your heart countless messengers holding hooks, nooses, iron chains, and bells, together with a black karmic energy that terminates the eon. They carry away the life principle, vitality, and life force of all enemies and obstructive beings from the sky and dissolve them into the effigy, like a kite carried by the wind, like a hurricane driving mist from the sky, and like deer driven away by hunting dogs. During the intervals between each of the 7 times you make the summons, you must repeatedly take hold of the life principles of the enemies. The consciousnesses are to be summoned. The life principle circles consciousness like a watchdog circles its master, so they must be crazed by summoning, binding, and restraining, and they must be bound with the deity, mantras, and samadhi. It is the life principle that must be extinguished. The cord that connects the body and mind is said to be the noble gods of the ancestors. It is the life force that must be cut. From time to time, by merely brandishing a kila as if you were churning yogurt, you stir up the aggregates, elements, and sense bases of the enemies and obstructive beings. Like butter emerging from milk, imagine the essential nature of their life principles turning into white in syllables, which are drawn up from the aperture in the kila, as if you were sucking up drops of water. Imagine them repeatedly dissolving into the spaces between the sun and moon on your seat as your personal deity. After the repeated appearances of indications of summoning in that way, when signs appear of the enemy's life principles, the activity of binding them is as follows. From your heart, imagine before you blue and red light in the form of cords being emitted, completely ensnaring and firmly binding the life principles, vitalities, and life forces, as well as the bodies, speech, and minds of the enemies, such that all their abilities and powers to move and fly away are restrained and suppressed, like stones cast to the ground. Regarding the isolation of the demon from one's enemy, some say that this isolation should be done just at the time of liberating activity, but not before then. Prior to that, repeatedly bind the life principle, and afterward perform the isolation. If the isolation is done prematurely, the life force will be powerful, and there is the danger that it will be lost together with the demon. As for the actual isolation, instantaneously perform the isolation and liberation at the mouth of an incarceration box by imagining two pissasis, one with an owl's head and one with a raven's head, each having a woman's body covered with feathers, and emanating a foul odor that causes one's enemies and malevolent gods to become crazed and to faint. The two roaring like lions, fighting, and beating their wings at the mouth of the incarceration box cause all the demons who protect enemies and malevolent beings to faint and fall into insanity. Enemies and malevolent beings are cast away and flee, following which innumerable replicas of the two pissasis are emanated, scratching them with the talons, pummeling them with their wings, and chopping them up and devouring them with the beaks. Finally, imagine that they are banished into the darkness inside a mountain on the far side of the ocean, so dazed that they can never return. While reciting and chanting expelling mantras, burn incense and fan it with a feather. Regarding causing insanity in enemies and malevolent beings, imagine drawing together the karmic energies of all sentient beings of the three realms, and visualize these energies in the form of a black wind that penetrates the tips of the ring fingers of enemies and malevolent beings and enters their life force channels. Due to the movement of these energies, imagine that the enemies and malevolent beings are utterly crazed as you recite JVA and so on. Then, the vitality transmission, the purification transmission, the abode transmission, and so on, are as follows. Visualize the Supreme Sun Kila like before, merely pointing to the bodies of enemies and malevolent beings. By stirring up their aggregates, elements, and sense bases, like milk emerging from stirred yogurt, the essential nature of the life principles of the enemies transforms into shimmering white in re-syllables. These are completely drawn into the tip of the Kila, like drops of water being gulped down. Dissolving into the Kila, like yogurt filling a pouch, imagine that the Kila is filled with fire, which satisfies the Kila with their life principles. Again, by stirring up their aggregates, elements, and sense bases, the essential nature of their vitality and merit transforms into shimmering green in re-syllables, which are completely drawn into the tip of the Kila. Imagine that all the contaminants and faults are purified from within, and then they emerge from the upper tip of the Kila and dissolve into yourself, greatly increasing your own vitality and merit. This increases the lifespan of the yogin. Again, the visualization of white rays of light being emitted from the tip of the Kila and completely purifying all the vices, obscurations, karma, and mental afflictions in the min-streams of enemies and malevolent beings is the purification transmission. Then, when the hearts of the enemies and malevolent beings are struck with the Kila, the consciousnesses turn into white bindus marked with the syllable R. They are drawn up inside the Kila as if being sucked through a straw, and all their afflictive and cognitive obscurations are completely purified, like impurities removed from a white crystal. With the utterance of fat, imagine that from the lower bulb of the Kila, the consciousnesses are transferred to Nirmanakas, from the handle the consciousnesses are transferred to Sambhogakas, and from the upper bulb the consciousnesses are transferred to the Dharmakaya. Then, like shooting stars, they dissolve into the heart of the principal deity visualized in front of you. Imagine that they achieve enlightenment in the expansive awareness of the four kayas and five facets of primordial consciousness, thereby satisfying the enemies by way of the abode transmission. Finally, imagine various weapons that are emanations of the enlightened activities of all the jinnas raining down on their form aggregates, and liberating the 3 poisons into the expanse of the 3 kayas, their 5 poisons into the expanse of the 5 facets of primordial consciousness, and their 84,000 mental afflictions into the expanse of the 84,000 collections of Dharma. This is the visualization of liberating activity. As for pounding them in a mortar, imagine all the aggregates, elements, and sense bases of the enemies and malevolent beings being drawn into the mortar of the secret space of the wrathful goddess Black Rolje. With the supreme method of her consort blazing pulverizer, they are pounded with his flaming pestle, such that they are ground down to tiny particles and dust. Recite the Tata Ya mantra 3 times, visualizing that they are being beaten with the vital points of samadhi and that the flesh and blood turns into the essential nature of the ambrosia of primordial consciousness with the form of a mountain of flesh and an ocean of blood. Imagine that the first portion is offered to the assemblies of personal deities, satisfying their minds with the taste of bliss and emptiness and perfecting the 2 accumulations of merit and knowledge. The remaining mountain of flesh and ocean of blood is served in an open pit and evenly distributed into the mouths of the guardians of the teachings and dharmapalas. It passes through the throats, providing unimpeded, great enjoyment, and into the bellies, symbolizing great, all-encompassing ultimate reality. By offering every bit of the remains, imagine that they are extremely pleased, thereby satisfying the guardians with flesh and blood. These constitute the 4 satisfactions. If the vital points of the view and meditation are met, it is said that a mantrayana practitioner may achieve Buddhahood upon the triangular incarceration box. If these points are absent, it will be no more beneficial than child's play, so it is important that you sustain these vital points. 2. Second, here are the stages of purifying with great compassion the abode of your followers who have attachment. There is no difference between guiding beings from their abode following death and liberating and guiding them, except merely in terms of the peacefulness or wrathfulness of the methods. First, in front of yourself visualized in the form of your personal deity, imagine a dome of light of the 5 facets of primordial consciousness with no doors or cracks and with no exit apart from an opening at its top. In its center, generate a white syllable in Re, from which rays of light are emitted, causing the consciousnesses of the deceased person, all beings of the 3 realms with the 4 kinds of birth, the 6 classes of beings, and those in the intermediate period to dissolve into the Inri. Imagine that they transform into pleasing, youthful forms, like when they were alive, wearing celestial garments of 5-colored silk, complete with all their elements and sense bases, kneeling down with palms pressed together, holding 8-petaled lotuses as an offering. You should imagine them to be dwelling peacefully with faith and reverence. It is said that a consciousness after death, with no physical basis, goes wherever it intends, so the generation and dissolution of your samadhi is very important. Therefore, from your heart as your personal deity, hook-shaped rays of light are emitted, drawing in the targeted consciousnesses wherever they exist in the 3 realms and the 3 worlds, like fish drawn in with a hook. Imagine them repeatedly dissolving into the namatag. Then emanate and offer all kinds of enjoyments, including forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations, to the 6 senses of malevolent spirits and malevolent beings who hinder and obstruct the liberation and omniscience of the deceased. This purifies the karmic debts from past actions, clears away the killing debts, and settles the other debts. Having thoroughly satisfied them, imagine that they return to their own abodes without creating any hindrances or obstacles. If they don't go and are about to inflict harm, imagine that from the pores of your body visualized as your personal deity, and from your abode, throngs of ferocious beings, foul odors, bursts of flames, weapons, and so forth are emanated, expelling all malevolent beings to the far side of the great ocean. Drawing them back in, imagine them filling a 5 or 6 layered wheel of protection, which cannot be penetrated or destroyed by anything, and which can never be seen by enemies and malevolent beings. Then teach Dharma to the deceased and imagine that their obscurations of the three poisons are purified by being cleansed with Va's water of the nature of the three kayas. By cleansing them with the ambrosia of primordial consciousness having the nature of the five kayas, the five facets of primordial consciousness, and the six perfections, their afflictive and cognitive obscurations are completely purified. Then imagine that they are thoroughly purified, like wiping away the dust on a white crystal and washing away its contaminants with water. Then, regarding guiding beings from their abode, the accumulation of negative karma by way of hatred, avarice, delusion, envy, pride, and attachment necessarily leads to experiences of the suffering of hell beings, pretas, animals, asuras, gods, and so forth. Imagine that many eons of such miseries are simultaneously transformed in an instant, manifesting appearances of hell beings, pretas, animals, asuras, gods, and humans. Then emanate a space treasury of clouds of offerings to the six great sages, including the sage of hell, such that the accumulations of merit and knowledge are perfected and obscurations are purified. Imagine that you act as a master who provides protection from the sufferings of heat and cold of hell beings, the hunger and thirst of pretas, the stupidity and dullness of animals, the conflicts of asuras, the death, transmigration, and descent of gods, and the birth, aging, sickness, and death of humans. Then you are entrusted as the guide. As for settling karmic debts, the deceased, over the course of beginningless lifetimes, has accumulated karma of the mental afflictions of hatred, avarice, delusion, envy, pride, attachment, and so forth. At this time, imagine that with the ripening of actions such as killing, stealing, and dominating, wish-fulfilling tormas are dedicated to the male and female beings to whom the deceased is indebted, so that they are all satisfied and contented, karmic debts are settled, killing debts are cleared away, and other debts are repaid. Then imagine that they are enlightened. 3. As for the purification transmission, purification occurs with the stream of blessings of the mirror-like primordial consciousness of all the assemblies of deities of the VAJRA family, including Bhagavan Vajrasattva, the discerning primordial consciousness of all the assemblies of deities of the Lotus family, including Bhagavan Amitabha, the primordial consciousness of the absolute space of phenomena of all the assemblies of deities of the Buddha family, including Bhagavan Vairocana, the primordial consciousness of accomplishment of all the assemblies of deities of the Kama family, including Bhagavan Amahasiddhi, the primordial consciousness of equality of all the assemblies of deities of the Jewel family, including Bhagavan Ratnasambhava, and the great, self-emergent primordial consciousness of the mind of the Buddhas, including Sakyamuni. Imagine that all the causal seeds and habitual propensities aroused by hatred, avarice, delusion, envy, pride, and attachment are thereby completely purified, like wiping the dust from a crystal or washing the rust from a mirror with water. Regarding the vitality transmission, from your heart as your personal deity, rays of light are emitted like the conflagration at the end of the eon. The causal seeds and habitual propensities of the deceased, for being reborn as a hell being, a preta, an animal, an asura, a god, a human, and so forth are visualized as follows. On the soles of the deceased's feet is the black seed syllable dur of hell beings, at the genital region is the dark red seed syllable prey of pretas, at the navel is the grey seed syllable tree of animals, at the throat is the pale green seed syllable su 90 of asuras, at the crown is the white seed syllable R of devas, and at the heart is the dark green seed syllable inri of humans. Like fine hairs burnt in a flame, imagine that they are instantly incinerated. In that very moment, imagine that the deceased falls unconscious, as if he were deep asleep. When the deceased regains consciousness, his appearances shift, and he becomes seated on an 8-petaled lotus on an empowerment platform at the eastern gate of the mandala. He then gradually offers homage at each gate in stages, starting from the eastern gate, and makes supplications to the gatekeepers. When he meets the deities of the mandala, a red syllable ram, together with the warmth of blessings, is emitted from your heart as his personal deity, striking the disciple, the deceased, and immediately consuming masses of the habitual propensities of his fully ripening karma. His consciousness then takes on the form of a white syllable R, which is drawn into the mouth of the principal deity visualized in front of him, as if it were a drop of water being sucked in. Imagine that the syllable passes through the deity's body and emerges from the left side of the consort's ribs and transforms into the body of his personal deity, and in that form the disciple retakes his place on the empowerment platform at the eastern gate like before. Then the disciple is again visualized as the deity, and from absolute space, primordial consciousness beings descend and merge into the disciple. Then gradually bestow upon the disciple the common empowerments of pristine awareness, the empowerments of the enlightened body, speech, and mind, and the four empowerments and their related rituals. At this time, imagine that from your heart and the heart of the deity in front, two deities are emanated and dissolve into the disciple, so that he fully receives the four empowerments. Then, to provide satisfaction by means of the sensual pleasures of food and drink, purify the offered substances so that they disappear into emptiness. From emptiness emerges the syllable Om, from which appears a vast, jeweled container. Inside it the three seed syllables, Om, Ah, Hum, dissolve into light and emanate an ornamental wheel of inexhaustible sensual pleasures of all kinds, offered as objects to the six senses. As for the offerings, the aggregates, elements, and sense bases of the deceased are presented as offerings to the Bhagavans, the Shugatas of the five families of jinnas, thereby completing the deceased's collections of merit and knowledge, and purifying his obscurations. Imagine that he attains enlightenment with his five aggregates of the nature of the five families of Shugatas, his five elements of the nature of the five consorts, including Akasadhatvijvari, the consort of Vairocana, and his five mental afflictions of the nature of the five facets of primordial consciousness. As for dedicating the butter lamps, by dedicating the butter lamps as being of the nature of the five facets of primordial consciousness, imagine that all the bewilderment of ignorance on the part of the deceased is cleared away, and that the illumination of the five facets of primordial consciousness expands to perfection. 4. Then, to elevate the deceased to a higher abode, visualize him as the deity like before, and in the center of his body, imagine the central channel imbued with four qualities. Upon the junction of the central channel at the heart, the essential nature of the vital energy, mind, and consciousness transforms into a white bindu marked with the syllable R. With the first recitation of Fat, imagine that appearances of a Buddha field manifest, with the second recitation they are recognized, and with the third recitation the deceased acquires firm confidence and perfect power. Then imagine that all the contaminants of afflictive and cognitive obscurations converge in that same namatag, which is incinerated by fire that burns the three poisons into the three kayas, fire that burns the five poisons into the five facets of primordial consciousness, and fire that burns the 84,000 mental afflictions into the 84,000 collections of Dharma. Visualize that the remains of the deceased's rebirths in samsara merge into absolute space. By means of such illusion-like yoga, the practices of liberating and guiding, which are like illusory displays, are taught for the sake of realizing the illusion-like nature of all phenomena. The appearance of that which doesn't exist as being existent is like getting angry at your own shadow. By intensely clinging to objects, various phenomena appear in the ocean of the domain of mental phenomena, and you become deluded. For example, however many distinct planets and stars appear in a body of water, in reality they are all displayed by that one body of water. Likewise, observe how all the appearances of samsara and nirvana are embraced by the one ultimate nature of mind. Regarding actual uniform pervasiveness, there are the uniform pervasiveness of the ground, the uniform pervasiveness of the path, and the uniform pervasiveness of the fruition. First, the ground is imbued with the ultimate nature of mind, the Shugatagarbha. Before sentient beings were deluded, it was never contaminated by habitual propensities of faults and stains, so this is the uniform pervasiveness of the ground. Second, even when sentient beings are deluded, they simply fail to see the characteristics of the ground due to the influence of delusion. The ground, which is naturally pure, abides in the nature of the kayas and great primordial consciousness. This is the uniform pervasiveness of the path. Third, even when you finally achieve Buddhahood, the nature of the ground, which has never been contaminated by habitual propensities of faults and stains, becomes manifest. It is not augmented by any new virtues whatsoever. This is like the essential nature of the sun not being affected for better or worse before being obscured by clouds, while it is obscured, or after the clouds have cleared away. Maitreyanatha declared. Its nature is immutable. The same afterward as it was before. And the ornament of clear realization Abhisamayalankara states. With no difference before and after. Suckness is pure. The ultimate nature of mind, which is called the Shugatagava, is a uniform pervasiveness uncontaminated by faults. For example, even if it were possible for space to be filled with Buddhas, there is uniform pervasiveness in that there is no object that could be benefited by the primordial consciousness and sublime qualities. And even if there were autonomous sentient beings throughout the whole of space, there is uniform pervasiveness in that there is no object that can be harmed by them. The ground Dharmakaya, the Shugatagava, has no place, object, or agent of origination, so it is free of the extreme of origination. Since it transcends any time of cessation and any agent that ceases to exist, it is free of the extreme of cessation. Since it is invisible even to the eyes of the jinnas due to not falling to the extreme of real existence, it is free of the extreme of permanence. Since it is the universal basis of samsara and nirvana, without being totally non-existent, it is free of the extreme of nihilism. Because it is beyond all locations, objects, and agents of going, it is free of the extreme of going. Since no location, object, or agent of coming is established as real, it is free of the extreme of coming. In the expanse of the ground Shugatagava, all phenomena of samsara and nirvana appear distinctly and individually, like reflections of planets and stars in the ocean. They are free of the extreme of unity. However the modes of samsara and nirvana arise, they are of one taste in the ground Shugatagava, just as the planets and stars reflected in the ocean are not other than the ocean. This is free of the extreme of diversity. Since it does not fall to any of the 8 extremes of conceptual elaboration, its uniform pervasiveness is unsullied by faults. Accordingly, the ultimate nature of mind, which is called the Shugatagava, is empty, uncontaminated by faults, and is the uniform pervasiveness of the nature of suckness, which is unstained by faults. Apart from your own awareness, there are no autonomous Buddhas whatsoever. Assuming that such Buddhas did exist and, for example, it were possible for space to be filled with Buddhas, you might think that the primordial consciousness and sublime qualities must improve the ground Shugatagava. But since there is no object to be benefited, all-pervasive emptiness is unstained by faults. Apart from your own appearances, there are no autonomous sentient beings whatsoever. Assuming that such sentient beings did exist and it were possible for such autonomous beings to exist throughout space, you might think that the karma, mental afflictions, vices, and obscurations, together with their habitual propensities, would impair the ground Shugatagava. But since there is no object to be harmed, all-pervasive emptiness is unsullied by faults. This ground Dharmakaya, imbued with the Shugatagava, is free of the 8 extremes of conceptual elaboration and is imbued with the 3 doors of liberation. First, this is how it is free of the 8 extremes of conceptual elaboration. The glorious protector Arya Nagarjuna declared, that which dependently arises is unceasing and unborn, neither annihilated nor permanent, free of coming and going, neither diverse nor a unity. With its teaching on complete freedom from conceptual elaboration. Homage to the sublime medicine of the perfectly awakened Buddha. The ground Shugatagava is free of all places, objects, and agents of origination. Does the ground Shugatagava arise from earth, water, fire, or air? No. Earth, water, fire, and air appear as such from the Shugatagarbha. Earth, water, fire, and air are displays of the Shugatagarbha. The elements appear as such from the Shugatagarbha, and they are its displays, so the Shugatagarbha does not arise from the domain of the 5 outer elements. If you investigate and analyze any appearing phenomenon, you find that its origination does not exist in the present. To take a flower as an example, it is a mistake to think that its full origination takes place in the present. For those things that have already arisen, their origination is in the past, and for those things that might arise from now on, their origination is in the future. During the interim, origination is not something that occurs in the present. Lingpa states, past thoughts have ceased and are gone. Future thoughts have not arisen. And the present cannot be ascertained. Accordingly, the Shugatagarbha is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults, that does not fall to the extreme of origination. The ultimate nature of mind, the Shugatagarbha, is beyond the past and beyond agency. Whatever appearing phenomenon you investigate and analyze, you find that its cessation does not take place in the present. To take a flower as an example, it is a mistake to think that the cessation of the flower that has already initially arisen takes place in the present. For those things that have finished arising, the cessation is in the past, and for those things that are still arising, the cessation is in the future. During the interim, the cessation is not something that occurs in the present. Therefore, the Shugatagarbha is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults, that is free of cessation. It is a mistake to think that the ultimate nature of mind, the Shugatagarbha, is included among real, existent things. Not falling to the extreme of real existence, it has never been seen, is not seen, and will never be seen with the eyes of the Jinnas, the perfectly enlightened Buddhas, the Bhagavans, so it is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults, that is free of the extreme of permanence. It is a mistake to think that the ground Shugatagarbha is utterly non-existent. Not being utterly non-existent, it is the sublime, universal basis of all phenomena included in the world of appearances of samsara and nirvana. So it is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults, that does not fall to the extreme of annihilation. As Vidyadhara Jigme Lingpa declared, it is not existent, for it is not seen by the Jinnas. It is not non-existent, for it is the basis of all of samsara and nirvana. The Shugatagarbha is of a nature that transcends all locations, objects, and agents of going. It is a mistake to think that the Dharmakaya Shugatagarbha goes to the east, south, west, or north. The east, south, west, and north appear as such from the Shugatagarbha, and the east, south, west, and north are its displays. As an analogy, even regarding mundane phenomena, going is not something that exists in the present. If you think that when you lift your foot in taking a step, that going occurs in the present, consider that once your foot has pressed on the ground, the going has passed, and the need to go now is a future going. During the interim, going is not something that occurs in the present, so the Shugatagarbha is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults, that does not fall to the extreme of going. The ground Shugatagarbha is something that is not established as real in terms of a location, object, or agent of coming. It is a mistake to think that the Shugatagarbha comes from the east, south, west, or north, for the east, south, west, and north appear as such from the Shugatagarbha, and they are displays of the Shugatagarbha. Even with respect to mundane phenomena, if they are investigated and analyzed, it is found that coming does not occur in the present. If you think that when you lift your foot in taking a step, that coming occurs in the present, consider that once your foot has pressed on the ground, the coming has passed, and the need to come now is a future coming. During the interim, coming is not something that occurs in the present, so the ground Shugatagarbha is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults and free of the extreme of coming. It is a mistake to think that the Dharmakaya, the Shugatagarbha, is of the nature of a single entity. In the expanse of the ground Shugaitagava, all the phenomena of the world of appearances of samsara and nirvana arise and are illuminated individually, without being blended together, like the reflections of planets and stars arising in the ocean. So it is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults and free of the extreme of unity. However vast and numerous the aspects of samsara and nirvana that may arise, they are of one taste in the ground Shugaitagava, just as the reflections of planets and stars in the ocean are not other than the ocean. So the Shugaitagava is a uniform pervasiveness, uncontaminated by faults and free of the extreme of diversity. Therefore, this ultimate nature of mind, the Shugaitagava, is a uniform pervasiveness uncontaminated by faults, which does not fall to any of the 8 extremes of conceptual elaboration. Second, it is endowed with the 3 doors of liberation. Further, it is empty in that it transcends the categories of above, below, the cardinal and intermediate directions, intervals, and time. It is empty in that it is all-pervasive and all-encompassing. There is outer emptiness in that all outer appearances cannot be established as bearing substantial characteristics or as being truly existent. There is inner emptiness in that your own inner mind transcends having any ground or root. There is the great uniform pervasiveness of non-exclusive emptiness in that between the outer and inner, there is no dualistic differentiation of the apprehended and the apprehender. This is emptiness as a door of liberation. The ground Dharmakaya, the Shugaitagava, is free of signs that can be expressed in words. It transcends metaphorical approximations, and it is devoid of anything that could be actually demonstrated. This is the absence of signs as a door of liberation. Regarding ultimate reality, the Shugaitagava, or the Shugaitas of the 3 times, the notion that this is a result of merely practicing physical and verbal virtues, and that it entails going to some other realm and being liberated there, is to think that the panoramic sweep of all pervasive space is an object or agent of coming and going. This is an extremely confused and muddled notion. What is the path? It is holding your own ground within yourself. What is realization? It is truly knowing your own essential nature and mode of existence. What is liberation? It is simply your own awakening to your own essential nature. It is utterly deluded to grasp at anything else as the state or location of liberation and to strive for that. Ultimately, since there is not even a goal to aspire for, this is the absence of aspiration as a door of liberation. Further, ultimate reality is something that is empty in that it transcends the categories of above, below, the cardinal and intermediate directions, intervals, and time. Although people grasp at such categories as above, below, and the cardinal and intermediate directions, in reality such categories do not exist. For example, when you ascend to the peak of a mountain to the east which is named East, that eastern mountain is located next to a central mountain. From that point onward, there are eastern mountains. This center that was identified is located next to a western mountain. This likewise applies to all the cardinal and intermediate directions and to above and below. Therefore, all the categories of above, below, and the cardinal and intermediate directions cannot be apprehended by themselves. Grasping at that which cannot be apprehended as something that can be apprehended is a case of lying to yourself. The great Orgain declared. Those who grasp at directions where none exist ensnare and delude themselves, how sad! Since emptiness pervades and totally encompasses all of samsara and nirvana, it is empty. All outer appearances are called existent even though they do not exist. In reality, since they cannot be established as bearing substantial characteristics or as being truly existent, there is outer emptiness. Moreover, if your own inner mind is investigated, it is found to be devoid of origination, cessation, and abiding, and it transcends all grounds and roots. So there is inner emptiness. Outer appearances and the inner apprehending mind are merely designated as being different, but the apprehended and the apprehender are not differentiated or established as being dual, so there is a great uniform pervasiveness. Thus, non-exclusive emptiness is emptiness as a door of liberation. The ground Dharmakaya, the Shugetagava, is not established as bearing the signs of form, shape, or color. It is devoid of articulable signs and is inexpressible by speech or thought. It cannot be illustrated by way of metaphors, and it transcends analogies. It is empty of the substantial reality of any object that can be demonstrated, so this is the absence of signs as a door of liberation. Ultimate reality, the Shugetagava, is a Shugeta of the three times, for it has never been deluded in the past, it does not dwell in delusion in the present, and it will never be deluded in the future. If you think that as a result of merely engaging in physical prostrations and circumambulations, verbal recitations, and the mental cultivation of good thoughts, mind training, mundane dhyanas, and the virtues of samadhi, you will go to some other realm and be liberated there, this notion that the panoramic sweep of all pervasive space is an object or agent of coming and going is extremely confused and muddled. Therefore, what is the path? It is holding your own ground within yourself. What is realization? It is first determining with discerning wisdom the nature of all phenomena within the world of appearances of samsara and nirvana, then experiencing the wisdom of realizing identitylessness, and thus knowing ultimate reality as your own essential nature and mode of existence. What is liberation? It is definitely awakening to your own essential nature, without being transferred to some other realm or hoping for some other place in which to be liberated. It is utterly deluded to grasp at anything else as the state or location of liberation and to strive for that. For these reasons, apart from making a commitment within yourself, the absence of even the aspiration for some other result is the absence of aspiration as a door of liberation. O my child, faculty of pristine awareness, you will not be liberated merely by my talking and your hearing like this. Investigate and analyze the nature of that which has already been explained. Let experience arise from the depths, stabilize your continuum of conscious awareness, and then teach fortunate people who are suitable vessels. By transferring my enlightened view lineage to individuals who practice single-pointedly, there is no doubt that they will soon achieve liberation. Saying this, he disappeared. O my child, faculty of pristine awareness, you will not be liberated simply by hearing these explanations of realizing all phenomena within the world of appearances of samsara and nirvana as an equality embraced by a single ultimate nature of mind. By investigating, analyzing, and familiarizing yourself with the mode of existence and nature of being of that which has been explained, experience will arise from the depths of your being. By so doing, experience the four kinds of unshakable confidence regarding the ultimate nature of mind, and correctly reveal this meaning to your fortunate disciples of the family who have a combination of earlier prayers and karmic momentum and who are suitable vessels for gaining mastery of the Dharma of the great perfection. If they single-pointedly put this into practice, all the blessings of the enlightened view lineage of Vidyadhara Hūṃchenkāra will be transferred to them, like a satsa being replicated. Before long, in one lifetime and with one body, they will reach the state of Jina Vajradhara, and they will certainly achieve liberation. Saying this, he disappeared.